Good morning to all. You are listening to Inside the News on Win FM. My name is Garth Wilkin, and I'm your host for today's program. The Win FM family is pleased to have in studio today the Prime Minister, Dr. the Honorable Timothy Harris, Minister of Health, Honorable Eugene Hamilton, and Mrs. Michele de la Coudray Blake, the Director of Counseling Department in the Ministry of Social Services. Good morning, Ministers and Mrs. Blake. Welcome to Inside the News.
Good morning to you, Garth.
Yes.
Morning.
And to your listeners and viewers as well.
Great. The theme for today's program is mitigating the economic and socio-psychological impacts of COVID-19. Inside the News is brought to you compliments Carib Brewery and The Cable.
As social distancing becomes the norm of our everyday life, The Cable wants you, our customer, to know that we are here for you every day. Just log in to us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Send us your feedback at email customerservice@thecable.biz. Visit our website www.thecable.net. It's also nice to know you can pay your bills at a distance, online at all commercial banks, or at www.thecable.net/pay. Now's the time to try online banking. It's ultra easy. Call us at 465-2588, 662-7742, or 763-0184. The Cable. We're here for you.
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib, it's the way we play. Drink responsibly.
Good morning again to one and all. The plan today is to have a discussion with the esteemed panelists during the first hour up to the news time, and then continue that discussion after the news when we will take calls. I would like to remind the listening public that the aim of Win FM is to play its role as a fourth estate in building our young nation, without fear or favor. Our mission is to educate the people of our federation and allow all sides to respectfully express their views on issues of public importance. We aim to create an accessible medium for all to submit and listen to sober recommendations, ideas, and concepts for the development of our country, not only through our policymakers, but through all of our people. The COVID-19 pandemic has been the greatest national challenge of this generation. During times of adversity, people and nations tend to show their true colors. Our public health preparedness system is being tested. Our people's reasonableness, humanity, and mental toughness are being tested. Honorable Prime Minister, your cabinet's leadership abilities are being tested. And now within our particular situation with an imminent election, our nation's political maturity is being tested. These are truly unprecedented times. My goal today, therefore, is to facilitate the examination of our current challenges and discuss potential solutions, helping all to gain important insights from our cabinet leader, our healthcare leader, and one of our top social experts on what we can do together as a society to make it through the tough times ahead. Before we hear from the panelists, I wish to personally thank the Honorable Prime Minister for steering our nation's ship through these pandemic-induced rough waters. I personally felt that your silence as Prime Minister between March 8th and March 22nd was deafening and left us adrift, especially given the rapidly evolving threats arising during that period. I even criticized you and the cabinet for this in my Dear Government, Where Are You Facebook post. However, when you did take charge, you did well and made some unpopular decisions which have navigated us safely to calmer waters, with no loss of life as a noteworthy achievement. As a nation, we must be honest, reasonable, and fair, especially in times like these. You are just as worthy for commendation as your frontline team, who have served us with honor and duty. I also wish to thank Dr. Laws, Dr. Wilkinson, Mr. Samuel of the task force, the Commissioner of Police, Superintendent Cromwell Henry, the security forces and their teams for their good work. All hands were truly on deck. Your pandemic response team has thus far, despite some hiccups, been efficient and informative. We are an informed nation, which has comforted and educated many. No one and no plan is perfect, and we're not sailing smoothly just yet. But when this difficult journey is over, those who have served honorably, tirelessly, and without additional financial incentive should be considered for the highest honors our nation has to offer. Now, in the reopening stages of our economy, by way of our new normal, your work must not stop. Now is not the time to switch on autopilot. I'm sure you agree. In fact, from a health perspective, the pandemic is still very much alive. It may even be more important to keep our guards up, as relaxed rules give people a false sense of comfort. One only needs to walk around Bastille to see how many people are liming, drinking, and not social distancing, many without masks. We must each play our role in addressing these delinquencies and should always support the police in enforcing our laws, which are made for the benefit of the society as a whole. Unfortunately, a large group of our people think our journey is over and we are back to normal. You and your pandemic response team therefore need to continue to be focused and active, because 100 years ago, we learned that the worst of the Spanish flu came in its second wave. From an economic perspective and resultantly mental health, societal perspective, we will now be entering, most experts argue, the even more dangerous waters of an extended global recession with an uncertain end date. Gross unemployment is rife, hardship is rife, anguish is rife. These are the cold hard facts facing our federation and much wealthier countries already, with the worst yet to come. In that context, with a new global economic restructuring approaching and the uncertainties that come with such change, we hope to hear from the panel and our callers your views on what our new normal in St. Kitts and Nevis should look like for the short-term and long-term stability of our nation, socially, psychologically, and economically. I anticipate a thought-provoking show and invite our panelists to make their opening statements. Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilkin. And let me say good morning to all who are tuned in to win another radio stations which are carrying this morning's Inside the News. I am privileged today to have with me the Honorable Eugene Hamilton, Minister of Agriculture and Health et al., Mrs. Delacroix Blake, who is one of our more experienced psychologists in country, and we are happy that we could all come to add to the ongoing public information in the country regarding a significant pandemic. I want to say, of course, that we have had an all of the society response from this one, and we have at the government level worked to a plan. The plan which we had worked was clearly anchored in our own realities, and therefore we determined in advance when the Prime Minister would intervene in this matter. We clearly had to provide space for the professional people to take the leadership, because this emerged and continues still in its main to be a health pandemic with ramifications, of course, across all of society. And therefore, what may have appeared to have been a delay was never a delay. It was how it was planned that it should be. The Chief Medical Officer had indicated, Prime Minister, at this particular juncture, we would want you to intervene. We will take the debate, the argument, the public education as far as was necessary up to this point. Then we would need further political intervention. It wasn't by accident. We also sat down and discussed when, as inevitably we knew it would come, there was our first case. Who would be at the front line at the briefings dealing with that? We settled that our Minister of Health, Senator Wendy Phipps, would be the persons. These are not coincidental choices. They were part of a well-planned strategy to deal with this one. Indeed, part of the rationale for our becoming now an example of a well-managed response to COVID-19 has been because we had a plan. An earlier clock since January, the health professionals had begun their consultation, their preparation to provide guidance to the government as to how we will have to react in these circumstances. And when you look at the record, because we could confuse timelines as to when we were impacted, others had been impacted before us. And so sometimes what you see was happening in another country was not immediately replicable or necessary in the context of St. Kitts and Nevis. But that is something for the historians to look at. What we do know and we accept is that COVID-19 has been brutal in its impact on economies everywhere, on our way of life, and our relationships with one another. Some of them are undergoing significant changes and will continue as part of the new norm. And I'm sure Mrs. Blake will address some of these. It has brought to the fore the vulnerability of the most powerful countries of the world. And at the same time, it has demonstrated that no country is too large so as not to require the support of the smallest of countries. And this came home in a very real way to us in St. Kitts and Nevis, because we got a call from the Situation Room in the White House. And what was the substance of the discussion was that the White House had St. Kitts and Nevis high on its radar for assistance needed in the production of parts required for ventilators. That took the smallest country into the Situation Room when the most powerful country on earth was faced with the challenge of procuring ventilators. And we had again to marshal our team of health professionals and persons knowledgeable with occupational health issues to come up with a plan to make a determination whether it was advisable for us to, as it were, facilitate those activities. In the end, based on the professional advice, we were able to give support to these efforts. And so I want to commend at the outset all the workers at Harris Silver Limited in Sandy Point and all other workers, for example, at Cajola and Jaro elsewhere, because their fine performance before COVID-19 made sure that when there was this pandemic, the knowledgeable persons pointed to St. Kitts and Nevis as being a place that could be of help and could fill a vacuum and a void that was taking place. The lesson from that for all of us is that we are in a shared world with shared responsibility, and we must recognize this at all times and not just in moments of crisis. COVID-19 has demonstrated to us here how much we can achieve when we support the all-of-society approach to problem solving and crisis management, which my government adopted in the war against COVID-19. There will always be times in the life of the nation when our collective consciences encourage us to speak truth, as God did a while ago, leaving the politics behind and acknowledging the greatness of our citizens and residents. Today I want to acknowledge in gratitude the strong support with the majority of persons across the political divide, religious and other stratifications have given to my government. And I am humbled by their own acknowledgement of the excellent management of the crisis by the government and the professional team, which we had given a lot of latitude to intervene, to advise, and to, as it were, bring their policies, recommendations to the government for adaptation. Their own response, the professional team, the frontline workers, and there are too many to mention, but quickly come to mind will be our health professionals, those in national security. And national security encompasses not only the police, the defense force, the immigration, the customs, and all of these organs and ministries of government. Their excellent service have motivated my cabinet to work even harder to ensure that St. Kitts and Nevis become the first country to have successfully defeated this COVID-19 and begin the work of repositioning St. Kitts and Nevis as a nation state ready to engage. Of course, there is still time for much of that to happen, but that is the aspirational goal that we hold dear in our heart. I want from the outset then to commend the cabinet for the support to me as the Prime Minister and to support of the professionals so far. I want again further to say that our plan had always had two components, largely again based on professional advice. What did the professional people say to us, Prime Minister and Cabinet? The first strategic task must be to keep COVID-19 away from our shores for as long as possible. It meant that we were among the first within the sub-region to adopt travel advisories. It meant that we were among the first to have set up health shops at our airports and began screening there. Even when persons were saying there were no screening, screening was in fact taking place. But it was not just having a thermometer to test. It was most importantly, as the science had been directing, that you had to pay attention to persons who were coming from travel hotspots. And that is why I think it was number 7 and the immigration 17. We keep repeating that that must be filled in, because that particular section, if I'm recollecting well, gave evidence as to travel history and became a critical, important measure to determine what further steps were needed by the health people. We were among the first to stop the cruise ships from coming. And when we did so, we were at loggerheads with some of the leadership in the industry who said, but this ship was let into Antigua. We had to make it clear, well, Antigua and St. Kitts and Nevis are two distinct countries, and our priorities at this time may not be the same. Interestingly, going back to where we have been doing this, we had our health team in when the cabinet met to discuss whether or not to deny one of the cruise ships entry into the port. It was Dr. Cameron Wilkerson who in the end took charge of the dialogue and indicated and defended the advice that was put to the government. And in the end, we were able to bring that meeting to a proper understanding that health comes first for the government of St. Kitts and Nevis, and everything else becomes secondary. And so I just say that to say that from the very beginning, the government had been relying on very competent professional advice to guide our strategy. Once, of course, we had our first case, we know we had to step up. And again, the plan was well outlined. We will be, and we have been, among the most vigorous in our contact tracing, identifying those suspected, and in fact engaging, quarantining, isolating where necessary their contacts. And when you look to see the hundreds of persons that have been put in quarantine in St. Kitts and Nevis, you recognize that we had a plan of aggressive contact tracing. And all that we have done from the health perspective have been consistent with the guidelines of the World Health Organization. And as a result today, at least as of yesterday, when we examined the statistics at 3 p.m., we had 3,175,207 cases confirmed worldwide of the coronavirus disease, and there was 224,172 cases of death. So this is significant. You contrast that with our case. We have 15 cases confirmed, and this has been the number for some period of time. Importantly, no deaths. Importantly, no deaths. And as we speak, we have no one in the hospital at this time being treated for COVID, which means that the severity that other countries have been experienced have been modulated here in St. Kitts, thanks to the early action of the government and the sage advice we've been getting from our professional people. We also want to thank God for those who have recovered so far, and we expect that His healing mercies will be on those who have yet to be designated as fully recovered. Our hearts, of course, are with our fellow citizens elsewhere in the diasporic community who have passed. I think 2 of them in recent times hailed from Cairn, and so our sympathies are with them. We are at this particular juncture. We are at a juncture where our successes have been recognized internationally. It isn't by accident that the BBC and the Sky News interviewed myself to learn more about the St. Kitts and Nevis success story to date. It is that the facts produce the evidence as to that success. And while we are humbled by it, we know that the course is not yet clear. And that is why we continue to insist, even as we relax, even as we allow people further opportunities to do business, further opportunities to move about, we say be cautious. We say wear the mask. We say observe social distancing. We say continue to pay attention to your hygiene, and in particular, hand hygiene. And the list goes on and on. And of course, continue to build up your immune system. I am satisfied that there have been progress. When we started after the lockdown, you had this mad rush. As we began to relax, as the public education, which has been one of the best in the region, we went to schools, we went into workplaces long before the first case had arrived. And eventually, because these are change of habits, which will take time, eventually the population began to respond positively. We still have more ways to go, and we continue, each of us, to press us in moving forward. The new norm then for St. Kitts and Nevis is that some of those things that have been imposed upon us in terms of our lifestyle, those things will continue for the foreseeable future. For the foreseeable future, we will still continue to wear the mask. For the foreseeable future, until we have a clear vaccine determined, we will continue to observe social distancing and all those issues of hygiene and sanitation. The new norm would require now that in the spatial layout of every public building, we have to observe what has now become the requirement in terms of the 6 feet distancing. And a little later, perhaps, we could go on to speak about the new norms in terms of tourism, where the traveler is going to be much more health conscious, and therefore how do we redefine our tourism product. The new norm would require greater investments in agriculture and fisheries, and our Minister of Agriculture is here to speak about our successful efforts so far to redefine a new pathway for agriculture in the context of nation building. So these are some of the issues we could look at and have a discussion, but I would want to pause now, save also on a note of commendation to thank the Social Security. To date, the Social Security has paid out about 2,000 applications, have processed and paid out 2,000 checks with respect to applications under the wage stimulus package. So that is a significant development. I'm advised every day payments will be made. So my advice to those who would apply and not yet receive, the necessary procedures are going through. You will not be left out. And if, for example, you are processing May, but you should have been included since April, you will receive 2 checks in May, one for April and one for May, so you will not be losing anything. Again, I invite your patience. I am happy also that we have been able to bring home the students from Jamaica, and we did not charge them 1 cent. I want to draw the comparison. When Antigua mobilized to bring home its students had to pay. Each one had to contribute, I think it was $400 plus US. And the private sector of Antigua made up the rest. There was no free trip in the context of Antigua. Only St. Kitts and Nevis is doing so far what we have done. I want also to indicate that so far we have committed to provide support to our students studying abroad. And over the next 3 months, we expect to spend in the region of $250,000 EC dollars. And finally, I would want to say that as part of our efforts to get the country back to work again, part of the relaxation, again, very deliberate planning, we have allowed construction to take place. We see what is happening on the island resurfacing Main Road. At Borio, where I crossed today, one of the best roundabouts in the region is taking shape. And certainly we see other activities that are now being built out as more people go to work, and a sense of normalcy or near normalcy, because perhaps we'll never get back to what was, is taking shape in our country. So I want to commend everyone for being a partner in this, and to thank the landlords. Some of them, I have been advised, have given significant reductions to their tenants, because this time is a time of shared sacrifice. And I wish that more people are in a position to offer some measure of relief to their tenants at this period of crisis. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to be on program today. Garth, at the outset, you outlined the theme to discuss mitigating economic and socio-physiological and psychological impacts of COVID-19. And so today, my contribution will focus on some of the economic impacts. How, for example, food, agriculture, and fishing will impact on those economic circumstances. I want first, however, to outline that I want to focus on thrift, how people should be conducting themselves, and how agriculture will help us in exercising thrift as we move forward to 2020 and beyond. Before doing so, though, I want to thank those citizens and residents of St. Kitts and Nevis who have been so understanding and so patient when you have to be home for days without being able to go on the streets, which was the other normal, and you have been able to do that with some degree, at least, of assurance that the government is doing the right thing. And so I want to thank you for your patience, the patience you've exercised when you're doing business and paying attention to the program that was put in place for you to be distancing yourself 6 feet away and being patient in carrying out your businesses on the street. I want to thank you for your patience, those of you who go to church and who have not been able to convene churches in the normal way. I noticed, of course, a colleague, a church minister, made a statement the other day, and I would like to suggest to that pastor that it would be good to consult with the COVID team before making public statements, because you do not want to lead your flock astray. We know that 100 years ago, there was a Spanish flu. It happened during the time of the First World War. And during that period of the war, many persons died. But most people who died was when the war ended, because people came out to celebrate the end of the war. And because of that celebration, millions died because of that same Spanish flu. Figures are between 50 million and more that died as a result of the conduct of individuals who thought they could celebrate, disnoticed the norms that were put in place, and they, of course, suffered. Can you imagine they were celebrating not being dead by the war, and then came out to celebrate and died because of their socializing? That is not where we want to be in St. Kitts and Nevis. I said I want to focus on the exercise of thrift. It is one of the very first statements I made when I got into the first COVID discussions. Tighten your belts, thrift, because our people tend to spend and spend every dime they get. And I am one who believes that the greatest lesson of thrift was taught to us when we read Genesis. We read about Pharaoh. When Pharaoh learned from Joseph what his dream was, Pharaoh commissioned more barns to be built and to put aside during those 7 years of plenty, so that when the 7 years of famine came, they will have enough and to spare. I am calling on our people to understand that we must exercise thrift. Our grandparents taught us that. I remember as a young person in a home with a grandmother, after my mother had gone to England when I was 3 and died when I was 10, and my father already moved on to another family. I remember the days when we go to Brighton to cut grass for the Bukra cattle, Bukra animals. I'm speaking in that language because I want you to understand it. That's what my grandmother did. But she put away something. The day she will say she doesn't have any money, no money at all. And yes, when the Jack's car come up the road for the fish, so you could get your protein, she will go and dig it out from where it was. And even when she gives you that money to go to buy the Jacks, you could smell the camphor ball on the money. That is because she understood how to exercise thrift, to put aside. I am calling on our people to do the same thing. Exercise thrift in all of your affairs, especially in the affairs where people work for so much money. They think it's very small, and they put away none. But the same people are on the street drinking heavily, buying food and things to eat with what they should not really eat. Those same foods which they buy, a lot of, expose them to non-communicable diseases. We need to take account, we need to pay attention to what we do with the resources we work for. So I'm saying exercise thrift. And I want to add one more line to that thrift message, because the truth is, I believe too many of our people go around borrowing money they don't have, and they can't afford, buying things they do not need to impress people who don't even like them. It's time for us to exercise thrift. This COVID, this disease, this is telling us that we have to exercise thrift. And so I want us as a people to learn the lesson from this COVID. I want to turn to fishing and agriculture, because I would like to leave some time for my other colleague here to make her opening statement. You see, I'm focusing on fishing agriculture because we have had persons who have been leading on the health issue.
Yes.
That was the task provided to them by the cabinet, and they have led on the health issue. Now we have to look at food security. What happens now and in the future? Before going further into that, let me remind you that the Spanish flu lasted for 2 years, from 1918 to 1920. We don't know how long this will last. So we have to position ourselves to be able to feed ourselves, especially if North America begins to say to us, well, listen, we can't allow all our food to go to the Caribbean anymore. We don't know what will happen. So we must position ourselves. We know, for example, that this country consumes 1,300 tons of fish products every year, average, about that. That is about 2.6 million pounds of fish. And we also know that to sustain that demand, 1.7 million pounds, or 850 tons of it, are imported. This provides a huge opportunity for individuals to be cooperative, join a cooperative and start a business to see if you can have an impact. You can just take 1.7 million or 2.2 million out of that money. You need to make sure that you can engage economically in areas where we have, because 1.7 million pounds, you use an average of $10 per pound. Just a small average. That's $17 million. And you cannot tell me that there aren't enough resources and minds in this country who can team up to take a chunk out of that $17 million by producing local fish. It is time that we take advantage of that. You see, with the onset of this pandemic, countries that export fish may very well be concerned about their own nutrition and eventually decide so much of the fish that we produce cannot go to St. Kitts and Nevis or anywhere else around the world for that matter. And so we at the ministry, we are saying that there's an opportunity to reshape the sector, to build support structures that, of course, will end with more productivity and more local consumption of what we produce. Now, we already see, you see, that some of the things we produce are being substituted by those who are shipping to us. For example, the Federation consumes large amounts of codfish. We describe it as saltfish. And we have seen that in instances they have used the fish haddock, replaced it, relabeled it to send here, which we are using as a substitute almost for saltfish. So we have to be concerned about what we are getting and therefore begin to produce more ourselves. And that is what this COVID-19 has given us the opportunity to do. Of course, we also use a lot of grouper, and we also notice that the Swahili fish has been used, swapped for the grouper. And so when we continue to import like that, we really are not 100% sure of what we're actually getting. So we have to up our local production. That is what I would encourage. I'm therefore going to let you know that we have, through the program, set out some support systems for those who are fishing and those who are doing farming. Let me, however, go to what we're doing in farming, because when this COVID-19 reached our shores and we had to put this program in place for curfew, we know that everyone had to abide by what the rules were. It affected our agriculture significantly. And I want to make the point, because there are persons who would like to say, what is agriculture doing? Listen, let me tell you. In 2019, agriculture produced 409.96 more metric tons than 2018. So there has been agricultural growth in the country. But what we have to recognize is that in our homes, we must become our own backyard gardeners. I remember as a child growing up, we have a guinea tree, you have a mancipo tree, you have an apple tree, you have a soursop tree. Everyone had trees in their yard. It is why in September, when I went with the Prime Minister to the schools, I called on students of the schools to plant a tree. And maybe we need to introduce, Mr. Prime Minister, I may have to come with that, a national planting day for planting trees. Because we have to plant trees in our homes. Nothing is wrong with you having a breadfruit tree in your yard, a soursop tree in your yard. Become your own farmer. In other words, stop spending money that you could actually save if you plant your own tree in your yard. Nothing is wrong with planting some of the vegetables that you need. It is why we set about in agriculture and have supported those who are doing backyard farming and have provided them with a lot of support to do their backyard farming. On day one, we gave out 50 pounds of string beans, 40 packs of sweet pepper seeds, 84 packs of Bright Star. And I can go on and on. The list is long. Almost 12 or 13 items of distribution of seeds so that people can also farm in the backyard. We put in place a special person to focus on assisting backyard farmers. Help them to understand how to grow, what to grow, and how to treat what they're growing. That is in place. So the backyard farmers, you can approach the Ministry of Agriculture if you haven't done so yet, and you can collect seeds and get the support from the Ministry of Agriculture of how to do your backyard farming. I am confident that if you do that, you will save at least 20 to 30% of what you spend when you go to the supermarkets. I'm not knocking the supermarkets. I'm just saying that it is time we begin to produce some of these things in our yard. We were taught that when we were growing up. Let's go back to basics. We need to do that. I want to suggest that to these people in this federation. You must be able to eat what you grow. Those that our farmers produce and those that what you produce in your own backyards. I'm going to just suggest some figures because, as I said, I want to leave some time for my colleague. We have, for example, out of the stimulus package, already committed $450,000 for the those. Remember, we had some farmers who lost livestock. That is already in place. We've already committed and spent $303,000 to acquire more seeds. We have already done $75,000 on feed. Remember that the feed that we're providing now is being sold at half price to those persons who are our customers all the time, getting feed to feed their animals. Of course, another $1.7 million is there for additional batical because we do not want, and it will be free to those who have animals because we want to ensure that we have food security, not only in 2020, but beyond. Of course, we've put money for animal tags. We spent another $1,000 on additional seedlings to just 2 nurseries, asking them, look, you produce the seeds, don't do anything, just produce it, and we will give it out to all of the persons, farmers and others who want to plant. The response after COVID, we don't know what the uncertainties will be, we should be sufficiently sourced with food from what we grow on the farms as well as what is grown in our backyards. I want to indicate to you that we've already plowed some 35 acres of land. The Ministry of Agriculture has done that so that we can plant potatoes and other things because there are some crops, that will help to sustain the well-being of people as long as we can produce them. And if we have too much, we will find a way to create another product downstream to preserve them. Let us produce. I want to indicate to those who are in fishing that we have actually put $50,000 already, selling our wire and other things at the fisheries at half the price. Rope, hooks, all of those things are being sold to fishermen at half the price. And we will be working over the next few weeks to get new measures in place to allow you to be able to fish so that we can have an abundance of fish in the Federation. In the unlikely event that the importation of fish is disrupted for one reason or the other. I want Garth to stop there for now. I know that there may be many questions, and I would like to respond to them. And if I keep talking, I'll speak for the 2 hours. So thank you very much, Garth.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I am Michele Blake from the Ministry of Social Development, Counseling Department, and I'm here to represent the mental health fraternity. We in the mental health think that this is an excellent opportunity for us to be able to talk about some of the things that we're concerned about and that we want to make sure that people have a sense of. So once this started, we felt that it was an important thing to do to be able to start giving information almost immediately because we recognized that whether people realized it or not, there were going to be some impacts on them individually, on them as families, and on their communities. So one of the things we started to do almost immediately was give information. We still continue to give information because we recognize that everybody may not be able to source an individual contact at every time. So we give information. So we begin giving information through PSAs, through articles, through different sources, through our Facebook page and so forth. And people have been using that. Now, we in mental health want to do a couple of things. And I'm going to do a couple of things this morning in terms of just creating a context. And hopefully as we go along in the program, we'll have questions and perhaps discussions that could explain some of these things some more. So I want to give a context. And the context I want to start off by is saying that this is something that is affecting all of us from a mental health perspective. All of us. What do I mean by that? There are some people who may not have been directly impacted by the COVID-19 response and by the COVID-19 pandemic, sorry. There are some people whose security, food security, financial security, they have a place to live that is safe and comfortable, so their sense of security has not been impacted directly. You have some people for whom this has just totally upended their sense of security. Their homes are not safe, their financial situation is in chaos, and so we're talking about people on both ends of the spectrum, those for whom the impact is perhaps minimal, and for those for whom the impact is more maximized. The thing is, all of us, even those of us who may not appear to have any sort of direct impact on this, all of us are being impacted by this because we are living in a community and in a society. So we see what is happening to others around us. We feel distress when we see families that are in a difficult situation. We see what's happening in the world. We contemplate what this is going to mean for our, the Prime Minister just talked about our new norm. We contemplate what this means for our new norm. We don't know how it looks. The last time we had a situation like this was in 1918 with the Spanish flu, so we don't have anything to compare it to. We don't know how it looks. So even for those people for whom it may not seem as if they're directly impacted by this, we are all experiencing some angst about what is to come next, and that has an impact on a person's mental health. So in terms of the continuum, I wanted to start by normalizing the fact that all of us are going to have reactions. I want to normalize meaning that this is not a situation where we need to be talking about those people who are affected versus those who aren't. I want to normalize it, meaning that all of us have an impact. There are some benefits that come from normalizing. So when we normalize behavior, it means that, as I said, that all of us are in this together. And all of us are in this together means our language changes. Sometimes I hear people talking about being able to deal with this because they may be stronger, and somebody may not be able to deal with it because they're weaker. And so those are kinds of language that we want to be able to ask people to remove from their vocabulary, because this is not about strength and weakness. This is about people coping with this situation at different levels. When we normalize something and when we pay attention to it, it means that we pay attention to the overt and obvious things, and we also pay attention to the subtle things. So there are going to be some subtle things that we have to pay attention to as we all deal with this mental health crisis. We're going to have to pay attention to subtle shifts in our family dynamics. We're going to have to pay attention to subtle shifts in how the family functions. What used to work before may not work now in this situation because of financial changes, living situations, whatever it is. And so we're going to have to pay attention to the fact that those shifts often cause stress and distress in families. And so when there's stress and distress in families, those manifest themselves in different ways, behaviorally, emotionally, psychologically. And again, we'll talk about some of those as we go through. Now, there are a couple of things that we look at as normal in this situation, that we are seeing as normal in this situation. We see normal sadness and depression. We see normal anxiety. We see normal increased stress. And we see normal people are grieving losses that they've had. Now, in order to be able to deal with some of these things, I was indicating in another forum that typically people have some ways to be able to deal with some of the things that they're faced with. So when we have anything that stresses us or frustrates us or challenges us, typically we find some way to be able to manage through those things, through either our internal coping skills, mechanisms, or external. So we are in a situation now where our stress levels and our stressors have dramatically increased. Everything has changed for everybody. Physically, emotionally, psychologically, financially, everything has changed for people. And so the coping mechanisms that we typically use to deal with getting through situations, we have to dig even deeper to be able to manage some things. And we'll talk about some of the ways to cope as we go through. So we're seeing sadness and depression and a natural response to grieving loss. People have lost lots of things. There are tangible things that they've lost. There are intangible things that they've lost. And so there are normal reactions to the fact that things that you anticipated and prepared for and worked hard for, all of a sudden, they're just outside of your reach. We're having some normal anxiety reactions. Now, earlier, the Prime Minister, I think, talked about the fact that, I think you were talking about the fact that, again, going back to the new norm, all of a sudden, the things that we prepared for and anticipated and were able to control, those are no longer within our grasp. And so anxiety typically comes from the inability to be able to control and predict how your future, how your day, how your space looks. When that is taken away from you, there is nothing to sort of ground you. So anxiety is a normal reaction that people are having. And anxiety could look very clear and obvious, or it could be very subtle signs. Your stomach just feels unsettled. You just have that sense of doom. You just have that sense of panic. So there are some things that are going on. We need to pay attention to the fact that there are certain populations that we have to be prepared to deal with specifically because they're more vulnerable. I am very concerned about children especially, because children display stress and anxiety and sadness in ways that don't typically reflect that. So they may have behaviors that have changed all of a sudden significantly. They may have behaviors that seem disruptive. They may have things going on with them that seem off. And so we have to pay attention to the fact that children are responding to this just like adults are. Children very much need structure and routine. And structure and routine are the things that keep them focused and keep their anxiety levels stressed. And so in a child's day, structure and routine is there. They get up, there's preparation, there's going to school, there are things that happen in school, there's what the end of school day looks like, there's what the end of the day looks like in terms of homework and perhaps bed and so forth. So there's a structure. All of a sudden, this is not available to children. And I'm not sure how much of it they understand, and I'm not sure how much of it is explained to them, but they're certainly in a situation where their own levels of anxiety and stress and sadness are going to be there. So we have to pay attention to certain populations. I talk about the family again. We have to pay attention to the fact that families are distressed financially, emotionally, and so there is going to be an impact on how children are dealt with in families. So at the end of the day, we're going to have to cope. We are going to have to cope for we don't know how long. And so it means then that we're going to have to reframe how we look at this and how we look at our control in this situation. So there are positive ways that we can cope, and there are ways that we want to stay away from when we talk about coping. And again, as we go through the discussion, we'll get into some of those. But just in terms of pointing out a few things, just in terms of coping, having a sense of gratitude, helping others, acceptance, reframing. Just let me explain a couple of these just before I go into some more. Helping others, paying attention to other people, helps to shift the focus from what is going on internally. Now, if you are in a situation where you're focused on your challenges and on your grief and on your loss, you just have that internal dialogue with yourself that just continues to ruminate. It's just that. When you shift your focus outside of that and shift it to another arena, shift it to giving something to somebody else or doing something for somebody else, you'd be surprised at what that does in being able to sort of interfere with that cycle of victim, being the victim and feeling sorry for yourself. So that is a healthy way to cope. Gratitude, being able to move your focus outside of the things that you've lost and the things that aren't working to the things that are working. And it takes a little bit more effort to be able to look at what good things could possibly come out of this. But it means then that you're pushing yourself to a point of being able to have a different experience. And basically that is what we want to do in this situation. Reframing simply is the ability to take a picture and look at it in a different way. We're not saying to change the picture. We're not able to change financial realities right now for many people. We're not able to change what is going on in the world. We're not able to change the fact that COVID is here. But reframing is something that we have power over. We have the ability to take a situation and look at it from a particular way, which then helps to shift our internal dialogue and our mood. So, again, as we go through, we'll talk about some of those. We have to make sure that in this situation where there is so much going on and there's so much of our coping and managing depends on our ability to dig deep and be able to, find things to be able to help us through. It is important for us to remember that we ought not to make too many big changes in times like these, because we are already having to use all of our resources to be able to manage, to be able to get through, to be able to adopt and adjust to our new norm. So it is not a good thing to have to make big changes in your life at this stage. It's important for us when we're talking about coping to use things like structure in our day, use humor, be intentional with how we care for ourselves. We want to make sure that people don't overdo. We want to make sure that people don't use too much alcohol to be able to sort of deal with things. We want to make sure that people don't use unhealthy mechanisms to soothe themselves or get into compulsive or risk-taking behavior. So again, these are some of the things that we want to talk about as we go through. But in terms of just creating a context, I wanted to be able to bring that to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your important input and comments. We are coming close to the news time, so I just wanted to put a question out there for the panelists to consider while we take the break. And I think it's probably a common theme throughout all of the presentations. It's to do with public health and immunity and building up our resiliency to deal with this pandemic. Dr. David Katz, a lead U.S. public health expert, suggests that we should use the pandemic new normal to educate people about healthy lifestyles so that we can build natural protections against the impacts of this and future viruses. He suggests that we have to build our immune systems as a society because germs are ever present. 80% of all chronic diseases and premature death are preventable by implementing lifestyle changes. 98 to 99% of the COVID-19 cases are mild. Most people don't even know they have it. It is severe in old people and sick people. However, lots of young people suffer from obesity, hypertension, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes as a result of their lifestyles and eating habits. Dr. Katz recommends that we eat well, sleep well, exercise, and those actions can help to protect our people against the health impacts of infectious diseases such as COVID-19. He argues that we must fortify immunity to the virus by affecting how our immune systems respond. He also argues that in every crisis there's an opportunity, and there's no better time for us to get healthy as nations and to develop a national health promotion campaign as is this time. He used the term making lemonade from lemons. And what I want to know generally is there a plan or is there some sort of idea so that we can become a healthier nation from this? Not just abstract, but an actual plan to educate people about living, eating the right way and exercising and so forth. That's generally to everyone in the panel. To Minister Hamilton, do you believe The Ministry of Health, in collaboration with the Ministry of Agriculture, could implement, for example, an Eat Better, Eat Local campaign or something similar to promote healthy lifestyles, which can then work in alignment with increasing local consumption. Because if, for example, you say, listen, eating local fish is good for your health, rather than eating imported fish that we don't know what they are, then it could go along with the Eat Local and Eat Healthy campaign. And Prime Minister, is the government willing to take, I've heard you speak on it before, but an unpopular step to increase, for example, taxes on sugary and other unhealthy foods to discourage consumption so that we can become a healthier country. And for you, Mrs. Blake, for your question to think about during the break, we know that mental health also impacts physical health. So what actual projects would you recommend or would like to see implemented by the government to prevent an increase in mental health issues arising from the pandemic in the short term and generally preventing mental health issues in the long term? So just a little food for thought while we take the break, and we'll now go to the Win FM News and see you all right thereafter.
The sound 98.9 Win FM.
We now bring you the Win FM Headline News. The Win FM Headline News is brought to you by Caribbean Alliance, KDP Enterprises, The Grange, Carib Brewery, CNC Trading.